r/nosleep. Hosted by you/horror-mode. I'm a former police officer. There's one call my partner and I took that I'll never forget. I'm Jay Miles and I want to share with you a story that stuck with me for years. I joined the force many decades ago. It was my redemptive way of giving back to society. When I was younger, in my mid-20s, I committed petty crimes in a desperate attempt to fit in. The culture at the time was one that admired bad boys and having a record was cool to most people. I grew out of that. I was partnerless for some of the 911 calls I responded to, and I'm just thankful to whatever being exists out there that I had a partner for this call in particular. Our police cruiser was parked in a dark alleyway, tucked between its brick walls so as to catch speeding drivers. It was around 1 a.m. when we received the dispatch. Someone called about a woman who was walking the streets barefoot with her baby while murmuring things to herself. That's all we were told. We arrived at the scene. My partner Rob and I were on edge the moment we got there, not least because Cinder Valley was a notoriously bad neighborhood. After circling the area a few times, the woman was nowhere to be found, so we decided to park the cruiser and knock on some doors. The 911 caller was anonymous, so we weren't able to speak with them directly. Most folks were asleep at that hour and we had to settle for whoever happened to be walking the streets that night. "You see that?" said Rob. "Someone disappeared behind a wooden gate by a house and we just missed them." Rob and I jogged over to see if we could get to this person, our possible suspect. I could see folks in their homes peeking through curtains, staring curiously at two cops running around in their neighborhood. It looked like the suspect entered someone's backyard through an open gate, so we flipped on our flashlights and followed. The backyard was pitch black and we couldn't see anything that wasn't within the narrow beams of our flashlights. I noticed my partner's light was shaking mildly. "You okay?" I asked him. "I'm fine." "It's okay to be scared, man," I said, chuckling. "Fuck off." A rusty swing set moved at the wind and the trees around us sounded their leaves. My body shivered, not at the cold breeze, but at the atmosphere. If I was unsettled, I could only imagine how much more my partner was. "Excuse me, sir." The homeowner suddenly opened her backyard door. "Sorry, ma'am," I said. "We'll be off your property in no time. Didn't mean to scare you. My partner and I are looking for a woman who was reported." "Officer, I can't hear too well. Would you mind coming inside?" I went inside to speak with the homeowner while Rob continued searching the backyard. I explained that we were looking for a woman who was behaving strangely and walking around the neighborhood with a baby in hand. While talking with the homeowner, Rob screamed from outside. "You okay? What happened?" I asked. It looked as if he had witnessed a ghost appear before his very eyes, then vanish into thin air. I saw her. "The woman? What did she look like?" "She." "Come on, Rob. Talk." He took a moment and caught his breath, with his hand over his heart. "She ran up the wall. Right in front of me. She ran up that wall, Jay. Like an animal." He pointed at the two-story house. I didn't know what to make of that. Rob didn't have a history of mental illness that I was aware of, and he certainly wasn't on drugs. I knew him, and I knew him for a comfortable amount of time to be able to say with confidence that he would never make things up, especially when it was serious, like police work. "Well," I began awkwardly, "did you see which way she went?" "After she climbed the wall." "The bushes over that metal gate there," he said, flashing his light at it. "I saw them moving." With our guns drawn, we hopped over the gate and searched the next door neighbor's property. "Wait," said Rob. "I heard you call for backup. Shouldn't we wait for them?" "No. We can do this just us two." This backyard was even bigger than the other, but it was just as dark. We aimed our flashlights at a wooden shed sitting at the corner of the yard, and before we took another step towards it, we heard someone crying. It sounded like a baby. "Police." I knocked down the door of the shed and we cleared the inside. The woman was not there. But there was a baby. A plastic one. Rob pointed his light on the ground of the shed. "The hell is this?" A mechanical baby doll that could play recorded sounds, placed there by someone for the purpose of luring people, was not something that sat right with me. Not a moment after that, our ears rang at a blood-curdling, high-pitched scream coming from the first house whose backyard we searched. As I dashed back to the other house, I noticed Rob wasn't following. He wasn't even moving. "Let's go." "What the hell are you doing?" I yelled. Rob's eyes widened as he glared at me, his mouth agape. I can't. I just can't, Jay. Sorry." I didn't have time to argue with him, so I continued on and hopped over the gate and entered the old woman's house. "What's wrong?" I asked her. I saw her. She was right there. The old woman pointed outside to her backyard, at a spot on the ground that was just by the glass door. She was just there. Just standing and looking at me. And I think she smiled. Okay, which way did she? Another scream. Rob's. By the time I made it back over to the shed, Rob was nowhere to be found. The plastic baby was gone too. I called out for him and looked everywhere, but he was simply gone. You know, it was like this mysterious woman could smell fear. It's something she seemed to prey on, and Rob had plenty of it that night. When backup finally arrived, I explained to my higher-ups at least a few hundred times what had transpired. This all took place decades ago, and Rob hasn't been found since. It's a cold case. When I think back on this night, it shivers my spine like nothing else. That mysterious woman, she was playing a game with the two of us, and it feels like she won from experience. I'm not even sure why I'm still referring to her as a woman, as a human being. Because if Rob's description of her is any indication, she was something else. A full year passed by and I went through different partners. I was stationed in the same city, and sometimes my new partner John and I had to report to calls that came from Cinder Valley. Eventually, I almost forgot about it all. But I never forgot Rob, wherever he was. Dead or alive. That didn't last long. One night, while sitting in our cruiser, John and I received a dispatch. It seemed like another ordinary call, until the operator mentioned something about a woman talking to herself on the street, with a crying baby in hand. Hosted by /HorrorMode. I'm a former police officer. I have another unforgettable story to share. It's J. Miles again, a cop with a useless English degree, here with another story. You may remember my last one here, but if not then that's fine, as there's no need to read these stories in order. They are my foggy accounts of events that took place many decades ago, and while some are difficult to remember, others are quite clear and very memorable. My partner John and I were dispatched to a bar around 11:12 p.m. There's someone crying in the dumpster. That's what the caller told the operator. John lowered the passenger window and stuck his hand out as I reversed our cruiser from the diner. This is what we gotta cancel our lunch break for? I'm calling it now, just some drunk guy. We arrived at the bar and saw a woman waiting by the entrance, smoking a cigarette, her shoulders to her ears. She took a last puff and pressed it against a brick wall. He's over there, she said, raising her chin towards the alleyway. I just want to close the bar up and get home already. These homeless people, I don't have time for their games. John seemed to agree as he leaned against the cruiser, arms crossed, yawning. Okay, he began, we'll take it from here. Head on home, ma'am. As she walked back to her car, the woman stopped and looked back. Oh, and by the way, he keeps apologizing about something. I don't even know, fellas. Probably drunk, but very emotional about whatever he did. The streets and sidewalks were empty, except for stray cats and dogs and a skunk or two. The stench from that alleyway was like moldy cheese, not to mention alcohol and urine. It all comes with a job, of course. Would I prefer the title of an FBI agent who battles white-collar crimes under the AC of his cubicle? Yes. But this job had thrills of its own, ones that never bore. I gave John a look. You want to get in there? Do your job? Me? Come on, officer, he joked, you're supposed to take me under your wing. All those years of experience, I could learn a thing or two from your old ass. Okay. Fair enough. Just thought your bald spot would reflect the moonlight and blind the suspect for us. Make our jobs easier, you know? We made our way between the buildings, where there was only black. The sodium street lights casted our shadows onto the wall, like a couple of armed men pursuing a burglar in a cartoon. John cursed when he stepped into a puddle and turned his flashlight at the ground. Wait, I said, my hand on his chest. Hear that? We listened in. Drops of water fell through a drain and splashed deep underground. A family of rats scratched somewhere in the corners. Crispy leaves brushed against concrete. And a mysterious man sobbed. That woman was right. This man was sincere in his cries. We couldn't understand most of what he uttered, not least because he was hiding and speaking in gentle whispers. Still the words "I'm so sorry" and "God, forgive me" were audible, and repeated. There was something off about the man's voice. Perhaps it was slouchy because he was drunk. Each word was droopy, falling off his mouth like a bowling ball rolling over a cliff. I flashed my light his way and saw his hunched shadow, but not him. He pulled patches of hair from his head as he rocked back and forth on the ground, leaning his back on the dumpster. His cries and wails, although low, were the stuff of nightmares. They stiffened my bones and put me on alert for any sudden movement on his part, and I could feel the same happening to John, who was following close behind. I tapped my shoes against wet concrete. "Sir?" He ignored me and rambled on. "We got a call from a concerned citizen. Said someone was crying in the alleyway," I said. Still nothing. I looked over my shoulder. "Johnny boy, now's your chance. Go help the man, and let's get out of here." John hesitated a moment, then flashed his light at the man and approached him. The man moved so that his back was to us, and we could see the missing hair from his head, but we still hadn't identified him. All the information he gave us were his constant apologies for some crime he claims to have committed. "I'm so sorry. God, please forgive me." John squinted and leaned towards him. "You see that?" The man's earlobes dripped blood. Suddenly, a scream. Not from the man, but from across the alleyway by the park. We rushed towards it, leaving him behind. We ran towards what we believed was an actual emergency, an actual situation that needed our attention. But the truth was that my partner and I were glad to have an excuse to get the hell out of that alleyway and as far as possible from that man. When we reached the park, we found a woman, panting and crying with a barking German shepherd at her side. Her hands cupped her mouth and nose as she retreated from the dead body on the ground. Some poor old lady lay on the park pathway, her face missing. The jogging woman suddenly let out another blood-curdling scream as she jumped and pointed at someone behind us. It was the man. He followed us from the alleyway. And when we saw him, we knew why his words sounded slouched and muffled. We knew why he apologized over and over again. We knew now what he had done. "Please, I didn't mean to," he yelled, grabbing at his eyes and limping towards us. The man had somehow stitched someone else's face over his own, and it looked like that of a woman's. An older one. We put two and two together and arrested him for the woman's murder. He cried and yelled and even charged the paramedics, proclaiming his innocence even after confessing. He said he was forced to do what he did, claiming that if he hadn't, then the man in the sewer would come for him. When John and I finished our reports that night and got back into our cruiser, there was silence. I knew then that he was a changed man, this rookie. Myself? Not so much. But although I had experienced these things before, they never failed to petrify me. I knew of the sleepless nights to come from this experience. I gave John a lecture with the side of my eye as I turned the key and drove us out of there, opening his window for him. "Have some fresh air, buddy." But he was expressionless, and with each streetlight we drove under, I saw the sweat on his forehead and around his eyes. I didn't tell John what I'm about to tell you. He wouldn't have been able to handle it. When we finally got in the cruiser and reversed out of there, I saw something. John couldn't get in the car and slam the door quick enough, but I took my time, and by doing so, witnessed it. As I put my hand on the driver's side door to open it, I caught a glow in the distance. Down the street, I saw a pair of glowing eyes descend into the ground, back into a sewer, closing the cap over itself. Posted by /horror_mode. I'm a former police officer. It's time to share the most disturbing case I've handled. I'm going to share a few stories with you. One by one though, because if I was overwhelmed by them, I have a feeling you kids will be too. I'm Officer Bradley. I retired from the force 10 years ago at the ripe age of 50. I'll begin with a story from my 20 years as a police officer that stuck with me like a deep thorn. January 17, 2005. We got a call about a woman who had locked herself in her bathroom. She said her boyfriend was trying to kill her. My partner Mason and I arrived at a house on the end of a street. The lamp posts flickered yellow, and the wind danced the trees and bushes. The clouds were thick and the air ice cold. We took position at the front door. We knocked. "Police. Open up." Only the sound of wind chimes. Mason kicked the door open with all the force he could muster. We scanned the house downstairs. No one in sight. "Clear." "You hear that?" I said. Mason looked up at the stairs. Gentle cries. A woman. So subtle, and as if muffled behind a door, in a room. "Thought she was supposed to be downstairs," said Mason. We made our way upstairs. "Ma'am? It's okay," I began, "you're safe now. No one's going to hurt you." The crying stopped abruptly, as if someone hit pause. Then it started again. "But he's still here," replied the woman from inside the bedroom. My partner and I checked the entire house. "No one's here, ma'am. You're safe." Downstairs, the front door slammed shut. My partner and I gave each other a gaze, and I could notice his brow sweating despite the cold night. I used my head to gesture for him to take a look. He stood from atop the stairs and looked down at the front door. "Just the wind, I think," he said. Then a gentle voice came from inside the bathroom. "Are you sure, Officer Bradley?" the woman asked. The entire night at that scene, neither my partner Mason nor I used our names out loud. Not once. "Ma'am? Do you need help or not?" Mason was agitated. "We need to know you're okay, so step back because I'm kicking it in." A part of me believes Mason was more eager to see the woman's face, to find out who she was and how she knew what she did, than he was for her safety. He wanted peace of mind. "No, hold on, I said. "She might be sitting right by the door. We don't want to hurt her." Then she said it. "Officer Bradley, tell Mason that if he touches this door I will visit his family in the late hours of a certain night and break down a door of my own." The woman's voice was an octave deeper when she said that. I never understood the expression, "white as a ghost." Do people actually turn that pale in the face? I learned that they in fact did when I saw my partner react to those sinister words. I couldn't stop him from kicking in that bedroom door this time. But when he did, we found nobody inside. There wasn't a window above the shower through which to escape or another door to go through. And yet, we were certain that we just had a full conversation with a woman behind this door. We scanned the entire house, including the backyard, one last time, inch by inch. Nothing. My partner and I communicated non-verbally the rest of the night. So when it was time to leave, we gave each other a look and left the house without even looking back. Now this is the part of the story I haven't told anyone. Not even Mason. We were sufficiently disturbed, so I didn't want to tell him what I'm about to tell you. When we left the house, I drove us back to the station that night. He probably thought I didn't notice, but his hands were shaking too much to drive comfortably. He doesn't drink coffee. As I reversed the cruiser out the street, Mason didn't look back at the house. But the truth is, I did. And I sincerely wish that I hadn't. I looked and squinted at a garbage can by the side of the house to see a strange, dark figure kneeling by the gate, as if watching us leave. And as we finally drove away, as the house became more and more distant in our mirror, the figure slowly stood itself up. And, I'll swear even today, that as it stood up, it didn't stop rising until its head peeked over the roof of that 2-story house. Posted by /horror_mode. A mysterious man keeps showing up at my work. I finally learned the truth about him. It rained that night. Bored. I kept myself busy stocking bags of chips. I mopped the muddy shoe marks on the entrance floor as the refrigerators hummed in the background. That electrical hum was annoying, but it served as a kind of musical replacement to the radio, which wasn't working that night. My friend Ethan secured for me this job at his father's gas station. It's not that working at a gas station is an impressive feat or anything, but I'm certainly not one to complain about getting a job, any job. After all, as my own father would often tell me, that's what you get when you major in English, Andrew. Nothing. He warned me when I was younger to always keep my nose stuck in a book, but then lamented my decision to do just that. But he was right, actually. It's not a practical skill. It was around 2 a.m. when I spotted a frantic man in the parking lot. I refused to take a single step outside and get myself wet, but he kept waving, almost jumping up and down as he did. I worried for a moment that he might have been injured, or was at least in some kind of emergency. It definitely looked urgent. It was dark, but the gas station's logo illuminated the entire parking lot, coloring it in white and blue. I waved for the man to come closer as he was too far into the dark. I yelled over the rain, waving and waving, until he finally came forward. He took off his hat, his eyes squinting at the logo's light. He raised one hand up to his face to shield his eyes from the brightness, and that's when he was finally able to spot me, standing just outside the entrance. The man was quite tall. He was wearing a dark brown business suit with a white vest, his feet sporting shiny, black loafers. He had a set of uncombed gray hair and thick eyebrows which looked worried, always pointing upwards throughout our conversation. "You know we're open, right?" I yelled, hoping he'd hear me over the rain. "We're 24 hours, sir." The man stepped forward, his loafers clacking against the wet concrete with each step. He dropped his umbrella on the ground, allowing the rain to soak his hair. "Have you seen my son?" "Your son?" I replied. I didn't think it was possible, but very suddenly, the man looked even more worried. His face changed and his mouth tightened as if to cry. "Sir?" I asked, concerned. He looked at me as if he forgot I was there. You haven't seen him, have you?" The man stuttered. "What's his name? I don't have any customers here right now, but maybe he came by earlier. You want to come inside? Maybe get out of this rain?" The man fell to his knees. It looked like he was preparing to plead with me, as if I had his son, as if I was holding him hostage back in the freezer room. He gazed at me with those worried eyes. He looked hypnotized almost. "He's my son, you see." The man was beginning to scare me, emitting from himself quite the creepy vibe. "Sir, I'm going back inside to call the police. Maybe they can help you. Okay?" As I walked back to the counter, I watched the man from window to window. Before I could dial the second one, I looked through the small, square glass next to the counter to find that the man was gone. I went outside, sheltered under the roof of the gas station, and scanned the parking lot. I didn't see him. When my shift ended at 7 a.m., Ethan arrived. "Anything new?" he asked, zipping up his work jacket to prepare for his shift. "Yeah," I replied. "Before I go home, I think I should warn you." "About?" "Well," I began, moving closer to him. "Around 2 or 2:30 in the morning, just a few hours ago, a man showed up. He didn't come inside or anything, but he kept screaming about his son. He left eventually, but just in case he comes back." "Oh, don't worry about him, man. That's Mr. Carson." "Yeah, he's crazy, don't know how else to put it. He comes by often, yelling about weird things," Ethan said. I tilted my head in confusion. "You sure, Ethan? Because if he's been coming here and doing that, that's Harris." "Andrew," he interrupted me. "Don't worry." I arrived at the gas station the next day at 11 p.m. The night went about normally the first few hours. Customer after customer stopped by, purchasing gas, cigarettes, snacks, cheap pizza, and on and on. It was around 2 in the morning when the man showed up again. I was behind the counter when I heard his faint yell. It sounded like someone repeatedly calling out, trying to get my attention through the weatherly ruckus. I looked out the gas station window and made out the figure of a tall man standing in the parking lot, but the shapes were blurred by raindrops racing down the pane. I reluctantly got up and walked over to the entrance. When the automatic doors opened, a forceful wind blew my hoodie off. I had to hold it in place to keep it on. "What do you want?" I yelled. "Ethan told me about you. You come here often, don't you?" "Well, if you come again, especially when I'm here, then I'm calling the cops." The man stepped forward into the white-blue lights that shone against the glossy, puddled concrete. "My son," said the man, "have you seen him?" Before I could turn around and walk back to the counter in frustration, the man fell to his knees and yelled. "Please," he cried. "Haven't you seen him? I'm sure he was here. I'm sure of it." His screams were not normal. When he spoke, his voice almost echoed, and it shook me to my core. His eyes widened abnormally as he looked up at the clouds, begging and begging. And from that moment on, whenever I tried speaking with him, he ignored me, like I wasn't even there. A bolt of lightning struck across the black sky, accompanied by a sharp clap of thunder. With that, all the lights went out. With the electricity momentarily cut, the gas station was pitch black and the automatic entrance doors left open. No longer was the logo illuminating the parking lot, or the man. I could see nothing at all. But, as I swore back then and as I'll swear now, I heard something. Before the lights flipped back on, as I stood frozen in fear between the snack aisle, I heard the distant sound of a terrible crash, a car crash. I heard a set of wheels scrape and burn against tar before hearing the smashing of metal against something. It was unmistakable. When the electricity came back, the man was gone. The next day, when I told Ethan about the man, he dismissed him, and me. He said that the man, Mr. Carson, was just a creepy guy who was no stranger at all to the gas station. Ethan's dealt with him before, as well as his father. I asked Bobby, a customer who I had grown fond of, if he had any information on the strange man and why he was doing this. "You mean Mr. Carson?" "Yeah. Him," I replied. "His name's not Carson, you know." I paused. "Really? That's what Ethan said his name was." Bobby gave me a look of pity. "Oh, no. That's just what us folks around here got to calling him. I guess Ethan and his dad never told you, huh? Well, in that case, I won't either. They must have a reason for not saying nothing. Probably didn't want to scare you." I responded by squinting my eyes at Bobby. What are you talking about? They didn't want to scare me. Could you at least tell me this tall, mysterious, umbrella man's name? I'm the one who has to deal with him during the night shift, you know." He put down a pack of mint gum on the counter and looked behind himself. "I really shouldn't tell you this, Andrew. But his real name is..." Bobby's phone interjected into our conversation. It did look like an important call, so he gave me an apologetic look and left the gas station. But just when I thought he was gone, Bobby came back inside and slapped a note onto the counter. He told me to give him a call when I was able to if I ever wanted to learn more. And so I did. Bobby revealed everything to me, but not before making me promise multiple times not to share it with anyone else, especially Ethan and his father, who valued me as an employee at their business. Apparently, everyone who's ever worked there ended up quitting when they found out about the mysterious man. Or Mr. Carson, or Umbrella Man, Tall Man, whatever you want to call him. But his real name is Weston Campbell. Bobby said that one night, a boy named Alex got in his car and fled from his home after a heated argument with his parents. Alex drove past a nearby gas station around 2 in the morning. Some say it was an accident, but others suggest something more sinister. And still others, suicide. Nobody knows, of course, but the fact remains that Alex's vehicle went off a bridge that rainy night. He died on impact. The words that came out of Bobby's mouth told my ears a tragic story. But it's what he said next that truly shocked me, sending shivers down my already shivering spine, shaking my beliefs, shaking them out of me like loose change. Weston Campbell, Alex's father, got into a vehicle of his own when his son fled the house, trying to catch up and follow him. He knew that Alex frequented a nearby gas station for cigarettes and whatnot, so he stopped by to ask the employee that night if they had seen Alex. Weston exited his vehicle with an umbrella and asked the employee over and over again if they had seen his son, or if they had seen his car go by. And when the employee answered no, Weston got back in his vehicle. Weston continued down the road, but didn't get too far. He sped until he, too, lost control. His vehicle swerved as he made a sharp turn against the wet streets, crashing into a large tree. And that was the end of it. Weston Campbell has been dead for 10 years. That night saw the loss of 2 people, leaving behind a shattered Maria Campbell, who became a childless widow. Apparently, this tragedy was well known to the townspeople, especially anyone who lived near the gas station. What wasn't well known, except to those who dared to work the night shift, was Weston's hauntings. I've kept my mouth shut about it, especially at work. Whenever I see Ethan or his father, I act normally, stocking the refrigerators and mopping the tiled floors. And whenever Bobby walks in, which is quite often, we share a look with each other, a look of secrecy. Whereas employees before me ran for the exit at the sight of Weston, and worse, when they learned his story, I, on the other hand, stayed put. He wasn't going to hurt me, nor was he going to hurt anyone else. He just wanted to find his son. Even as I finish writing this, as the rain pounds heavily against the roof of the gas station, I can hear a faint yell, a yell fighting against the weather to get to my ears. And looking out of the window to my left, I can even see him now, waving. I think it's about time for me to get up from behind this counter to greet him once again. Posted by you/HorrorMode. If you ever hear a cry for help while camping, you better ignore it. I love camping. But after my most recent trip, I don't think it will ever be the same. I set up my tent on nice, flat ground and collected some wood for a fire. The night came with all its nightly sounds, and I relaxed at the hooting owls and chirping crickets. Even better was the fact that no one else was around. Or so I thought. Help. It was subtle. I almost missed it. The voice came from deep within the woods, and for a moment I didn't believe what I was hearing. It sounded female, but oddly enough, I just couldn't tell. Please help, it continued. I shined my flashlight between the bushes and walked around a little. To be completely honest, even as a grown man, I was paralyzed with fear. So, I did the responsible thing and called the police. That's when things went from odd to very, very weird. The police told me to ignore it. I explained to them that someone could be injured and probably needed medical attention, but they assured me otherwise. When I kept pushing and asked why, the police told me, "Sir, if you ever hear that voice again, ignore it. Do not respond." Well, I did hear it again. But I didn't ignore it. It was almost midnight when I heard the voice a second time. I awoke to someone whispering help and it sounded like she was just outside my tent. I went out to check and no one was there, but the voice continued from a distance, "Help. Please." Again I grabbed my flashlight and looked around the area I was camping. I was too afraid to follow the voice into the woods, especially since the authorities themselves avoided it. But I struggled morally, trying to decide whether I should go and help this person or listen to the police, who seemed concerned for my safety. But then I heard another, different voice. This other voice, which also seemed to be coming from the woods, was an octave lower. Unlike the first one, which cried for help, this one was loud and demanding. "Quiet." The other voice growled. "No one's going to help you." Once I heard that, I was sure someone was in trouble. I called the police again. When I informed them about a second voice coming from the woods, the police seemed even more concerned. They told me that I should pack my things and leave the campsite immediately. They said that hearing the second, more manly voice meant that it was getting desperate. They also said that the two voices were coming from the same person. That part was bizarre and confused me, to say the least. It was at this point I dismissed the police in that area as crazy, but not before telling them off. I got angry. I told the police that if they didn't get down here to come and check it out, then I would do it myself. I said repeatedly that a woman could be in serious trouble and that it was their duty to help her, but still they refused to come. All they kept repeating to me over the phone was, "Do not enter the woods, sir." They seemed more afraid than I was. Once I hung up the phone, I heard the voices again. A gentle, "Please, somebody help me." And then a growling, "Quiet. No one's coming." It was a little past midnight at that point. I couldn't live with myself knowing that I had the chance to save someone's life but instead cowered. So, I grabbed some things and ventured into the woods. When I entered the woods, the voices ceased. Just like that. No cries, no whispers, and no commands. Even the owls and crickets went away. Nothing but dancing leaves and creaking tree branches could be heard. I stopped walking and looked around, a full 360 degrees. "Hello? Anyone here?" I called out. "Nothing. I'm here to help," I continued. "Where are you? Are you okay?" Still nothing. I thought of calling the police again, then chuckled to myself. I found it strange but somewhat comforting that I didn't find anyone out there, especially since I kept hearing it over and over again throughout that night. Nonetheless, I was still creeped out, so I packed my things and finally left the campsite. I didn't know why the police, of all people, were so afraid. Worst case, someone was in actual danger and we've all failed them. Best case, morons who think saying, "Help me" in the middle of nowhere is a good idea for a joke. To be honest, when I heard the voice the very first time, I did think it was a joke. When I heard it the second time, along with that other voice, I became a bit more concerned. And same with the third time I heard it in the woods. But when I heard it again a fourth time, a week after I left the campsite, coming from inside my own house, I was very, very concerned. Posted by /horror_mode. I spoke with a being once who told me something quite disturbing. It was 3 a.m. when my glasses jiggled at the vibration of the drawer, then fell on my bedroom floor. When the thud shook my room again, I sat up in bed and squinted at the window. It came from the backyard, but it seemed as if only I could hear and feel the ferocious noise, because neither my parents nor sibling woke up. If they had, father would have rushed downstairs with a bat, little sister following behind until mother stopped and picked her up. I sat and waited for another thud. It came. My bare feet felt warmth on the bedroom rug, but it also felt odd, so I looked down to see that I had crushed my glasses. I poked my head out the door and saw no one in the hallway, which didn't surprise me. I must be the lightest sleeper in the family. I knew the heavy thuds were coming from outside because they had a muffled sound to them, as if they came from behind a wall. My little sister is the braver of us, following father downstairs in the dead of night to catch what they believed to be intruders, but turned out to be raccoons. I, on the other hand, was the easily frightened child. It was a running joke in the family that no one bothered to make inside, but I soon learned it wasn't a joke at all. Father would call on my sister to help him with things that I was supposed to help with. When that became frequent, I decided that I had to redeem myself, and the night the thudding began was my perfect opportunity. I descended the stairs, tiptoeing and glancing back up in case my family awoke. I paused on every other step and closed my eyes, listening in, making sure father was still snoring. My parents certainly wouldn't approve of my nightly adventure into the backyard, especially if I told them it was because I had heard something. And my sister would have used that ammo of embarrassment for the next few years, laughing at me until her face was a tomato. I had to be quiet. When I slid the backyard door closed behind me, an ice-cold zephyr scratched my face, and at that moment I regretted my manly attitude and felt moronic not bringing a jacket. With my back against the door, my eyes darted left and right, up and down, searching for the intruder. The noise he made, however, couldn't have possibly come from him. Again there was a thud, and again it shook the ground. My ankles buckled. Water shot up and waves formed in the swimming pool. Earthquakes were common in our area, so I'm sure my family and neighbors dismissed it as so, but I knew otherwise because I was there, outside, feeling the thuds beneath my feet. You know, my grandfather once heard similar things. He passed a year ago and spent the last few months of his life insane. That's what my father called him, as well as everyone else, and I'm ashamed to admit I thought so too. He lived with us and would wake up screaming in sweat, opening and pointing out the window. My parents had to hold him back, reassuring him no one was out there. Quiet. He'd reply, I know what I heard out there. I'm not crazy, you are. The last straw was when my parents found him sitting on a lawn chair in the backyard, staring at the ground and murmuring. I once heard Mother on the phone with someone, explaining that she had heard our grandfather apologizing as he sat out there. He would constantly apologize as he stared at the lawn. But no one was around. He repeated this almost every other night until my parents put him in a home, where he passed shortly after. In fact, he used to stay in the bedroom I'm in now. My old room was across the hall, by my sister's, and I remember vividly waking up at another one of his rants. I'd watch through my cracked open door, mouth agape, as my parents yelled at him and closed his window. I no longer believe my grandfather was crazy, not after experiencing the same thing he did. He was right, there was truly something hidden underneath our very own backyard, going bump in the night. As I made my way towards the lawn, a less violent thud sounded, kicking up dirt from the grass. With my ear to the ground, I closed my eyes and listened in. They shot back open a second later when I realized I could hear Father snoring, but his bedroom light was still off, so I put my ears back to the ground. Moments passed and all I heard was my heartbeat and a few crickets by the bushes. Move, child. It came from the ground. I jumped up as my heart raced to exit my chest. I clearly heard someone say, move in a very low voice, in an octave I had never heard uttered by man. Suddenly, a small hole formed in the middle of the lawn, and it grew and grew until it was the size of a small car. The circle formed without sound, and I watched as it ate the grass and dirt and rocks around it. When the formation ceased, a black sphere arose slowly from within it, a head. A pair of glowing white dots appeared on the sphere, eyes. It looked like a man. And it was like he was peeking over at me from within the hole, only his head visible. But this was no man. Closer, it whispered. Whenever it spoke, it sounded like someone had placed a large speaker underground, or in a deep pool of water. I walked towards it, and from my distance I was able to look down into the hole. The thing looked up at me, its skin as black as a strong shadow, and only its white, flashlight eyes distinguishable. From time to time, I saw its narrow arms at its sides, but not much else. My lips quivered, and I noticed my body was warmer now that I was near it. Who are you? With every question of mine came an answer preceded by a pause, and sometimes the thing wouldn't answer at all. It would just watch. But the thing did answer my very first question. The one who dwells below, it replied. My body shivered. I don't understand. I was a child then. Thinking back on my conversation with that thing, it became clearer, including that statement. Are you human? I continued. It didn't answer, but what it didn't give in facial expressions it made up with atmospheric change. Whenever I said something, I couldn't tell the thing's reaction because of its dark, expressionless face. When it spoke, I could see its mouth move and all, but I couldn't make out its emotions. Yet I knew my question insulted it because of what I felt in the atmosphere. The atmosphere changed and expressed whether the thing was angry or neutral. I can't possibly explain it, but its emotions were in the air. I looked up at my parents' bedroom to see their window glow yellow. They were awake. My heart sped again and I worried the thing would hurt them if they came out in the backyard. Can I go back inside? I won't say anything. I promise I won't bother you again, I said. Why are you afraid? It asked. I looked back up at their bedroom and saw that the lights were off again. I knew that thing was the one who did it. Did you do that? Did you make them go back to sleep? I said. Again it didn't reply. Did you know my grandfather? I continued. I had a feeling my grandfather knew the thing in the ground, that this thing was what he had heard and warned about those many sleepless nights before. But something also told me the thing in the ground knew my grandfather. Something told me it knew me, my sister, my parents, and even Rufus, our dog. It knew everyone. I pulled from my back pocket a little crucifix Mother had given me and closed my eyes. I was afraid when the thing met my questions with a blank stare, so I began to whisper prayers to myself, right in front of it. I opened my left eye to find that it was still watching, looking up at me from down in the hole, so I closed it again tightly. But then I heard something. From deep within that hole in the ground, that hole that must have led to the center of the earth, that hole the thing called home, came distant and horrible cries. Something deep within caused a yellow-orange glow to rise, and my clothes dampened at the heat. Who do you pray to, child? It asked me. The crucifix melted in my hand and dripped onto the grass like water, hardened metal clanking on rock. I glared at the thing in shock, but I dared not ask whether it did that, and certainly not why it did it. Child, it repeated. To whom do you pray? When it asked that a second time, I was eager to answer, lest my silence anger it. It looked up at the sky, and I looked up too and saw the starless black. It titled its head, as if confused, then looked to me again. Why do you look up for help? God is not there, it said. I am down here. Posted by /horror_mode. There's a man standing across the street from my house. He does this strange thing. I couldn't sleep. The tension was too much. Every time I peeked out my bedroom window, I saw him standing there. He was about 100 feet away, across the street, under a tree by the lamppost, frozen like a statue. I first spotted him around 1 a.m. He stood there for hours. I couldn't make out his eyes from the distance, but I knew he was looking straight at me. I knew this because my room is on the second floor of the house, and his head was pointing upwards. Everything about the man was odd. I've never seen anyone like him. There was a mailbox a few feet from him and it was half his size, but the tree shielded almost everything else. And that's all I could see. I waited and waited for him to step forward so that dusty, old lamppost would illuminate him in its yellow glow. I couldn't sleep knowing there was a black figure of a man stalking me from under an oak tree across the street. I got closer to the window and waved at him. I titled my head and put my hands on my hip. I leaned forward and squinted, engaging him in a stare down. Nothing. I didn't see anyone else out on the street, not even those pesky raccoons. That night was eerily quiet and hopelessly dark. Even the moon was hiding. I dragged a cushioned chair to the window and continued to watch. I put one foot on the frame and sat back. I let out a strong yawn, my eyes began to droop, and my guard fell. I woke up in the chair and learned that I had been asleep just 5 minutes. I almost forgot why I was sitting in the chair, until I looked out the window in front of me. He was still there. At that point, I thought of calling the cops, but I didn't. What if he's homeless? Am I really going to call the cops on some poor man? I can't even prove he's doing anything to me in particular. So I sat back in my chair and watched. But something finally caught my eye in the corner of the window. A dog made its way on the sidewalk towards the man. It was a big German shepherd, wagging its tail and sniffing each and every trash can it passed by. I leaned forward as I watched it get closer and closer towards the man under the tree. The dog stopped and tucked its tail between its legs, watching the man in confusion. It got close enough until it was right at his feet. That's when everything became less visible. My nose was up against the window, I was so close to it. My eyes widened like that of a child's at the sight of candy. And that's when I heard it. The dog let out a sharp yelp. I opened the window and put my head out as much as I could to get a better view, but I certainly wasn't heading downstairs to go outside and confront the man. I did go downstairs to phone the police. As I waited for them, I kept my eye on the man. He was in the same place. Same posture. Same eerie atmosphere. I was sure the dog was dead. I heard its unmistakable cry, followed by complete silence. It was dead, and that psycho across the street was the one who murdered it. But then I heard a bark. It came from exactly the same spot where the man was. I couldn't believe my eyes as I stepped closer to the window. For the first time since I saw him, the man moved. It looked like he was kneeling. He wasn't as towering as he was before, so I'm very sure he was kneeling or something. And every time I heard that bark, his head would move. The man. He was barking. And it sounded exactly like that of a dog. The police arrived. I had told the operator that there was a man standing across the street from my house, and that he killed a stray dog when it walked up to him. The cop parked his cruiser pretty far and began walking towards the man. I felt like opening the window and screaming, "Yes, sir, he's right there. But be careful, I think he's dangerous." I didn't. The officer stood there and spoke with the man for about 10 minutes. Well, the officer spoke at him. It didn't look like the man responded to the questions at all, and the officer grew agitated. I think I learned a lot about body language from this ordeal. I looked away for half a second, and a loud bang rumbled the window. There was a gunshot. I ducked under the frame and crawled under the bed. It was silent for a while. I crawled back to the window and looked over. The officer was dead. A puddle of blood began to slip into the sidewalk drain. My heart wanted to leave my chest. I almost vomited anxiety. I attempted to pick up the phone 3 different times, but each time my hand would grow weak and drop it. I couldn't contain myself. As you could imagine, I wasn't prepared, bodily or mentally, for what came next. The man stepped forward. That old lamppost dressed him in night yellow and I could finally see him. The thing is, he looked exactly like the officer. The one laying on the sidewalk dead. He mimicked the dead officer's movements too, everything from the way he walked to his mannerisms when he spoke. It looked like he was even impersonating the way the officer was questioning him those 10 minutes before. And he was naked. By the time the cops arrived, the man was gone. I explained everything to them, over and over again. They questioned me for the next few days. I checked the window each time before bed since that night. I'd even check when I got up in the middle of the night for water or to use the bathroom. But most of the times I got up to check were when I'd wake up from violent nightmares. After some time, comfort came. I believed for a moment that the man was gone for good. But don't we all do that? Don't we all participate in some form of naivety or another? Especially when we desperately want to believe something. I had another nightmare. But there was something different about this one, different in the sense that it felt real. Very, very real. But I remember times when I'd think back on memories and couldn't decide whether they were dreams or reality. Sometimes we mix them up. This was one of those times. In this dream, or nightmare, I was sleeping in bed. I wake up startled to a sensation on the back of my head, a cold one, like someone put their frozen hands on me. And as I turn around half asleep, my eyes barely catch someone leaving. I just see their foot for a split second as they get out of sight. And that was the end of the dream. Well, maybe it wasn't a dream. Maybe someone really did walk into my room and touch the back of my head. Because one night, I received the following phone call from a dear friend of mine. "Bryce?" I answered. "Hey," he replied. What's up? Everything okay? Why you calling so late? You think you're funny, Mason?" I paused for a second. "What?" I got up in bed. "Well," he began, "I was getting ready to go to bed. Then I look out my window, and guess who I see standing outside my house at 1 a.m.? I paused again, confused. "Who?" "Mason, you're really not funny. Who goes this far for a prank? I have no idea what you're." My heart sped. "Bryce, listen. That man outside your house is fucking dangerous. Call the cops now," I said. "Oh my God. You're really committed to this, aren't you?" "Bryce, I swear to God it's not me. I'm at home. It's the same man who was stalking me just a few days ago." "If that's true," said Bryce, "then why does he look exactly like you?"